The text message from Ryan popped up on my phone at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Hey Sarah, left some important documents at home. Could you bring them to my office? The blue folder on my desk. My husband never forgot anything at home. In 15 years of marriage, this was a first. I was already mentally preparing my excuse to leave work early when another message arrived. Really need them by 4. Thanks, babe. I smiled to myself, thinking how this would work perfectly with my plans. Tom, my colleague from the marketing department, had been trying to get me alone for weeks now. The sexual tension between us had become unbearable during our project meetings. Stolen glances across the conference room, accidental touches that lingered too long, and conversations that dripped with double meanings. Of course, honey, I texted back, my fingers trembling slightly with anticipation. Heading home now. I told my boss I had a family emergency and practically ran to my car. But instead of driving home, I turned toward the Holiday Inn where Tom was already waiting. We had been planning this for days, our first time together. The thrill of deception made my heart race as I checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror. The hotel room door had barely closed behind me when Tom's lips crashed into mine. I've been thinking about this all day, he whispered, his hands already working on the buttons of my blouse. I melted into his touch, forgetting everything else. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. Ryan, where are you with those documents? The guilt hit me like a bucket of ice water. I had completely forgotten about his request. My mind raced to construct a believable excuse as I hastily got dressed, ignoring Tom's protests about leaving so soon. Traffic is horrible, I texted back. Just left home. Be there in 30. I broke several speed limits getting to our house, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. Racing to Ryan's home office, I spotted the blue folder immediately, but something felt off. The folder was too light, almost empty. When I opened it, there was only one sheet of paper inside. My blood ran cold as I read the typed message. I know about Tom. I have proof. And this isn't your first time, is it, Sarah? My hands trembled as I read the note again, trying to understand how Ryan had discovered my secret. Tom was supposed to be the perfect affair. No mutual friends, no paper trail, no suspicious credit card charges. I'd learned from my mistakes with David 2 years ago, and Mark before him. Each time, the thrill of getting away with it had made me bolder, more confident in my ability to maintain 2 separate lives. I sank into Ryan's office chair, my mind racing through recent conversations, searching for any slip-ups. Had he noticed how I always positioned my phone face down? Did he suspect something when I started working late on quarterly reports with Tom? The weight of every lie I told him suddenly felt suffocating. My phone chimed with another message from Ryan. Everything okay? You've been gone a while. The casual tone of his text made me question everything. Maybe I was overreacting. Perhaps the note was about something else entirely. Ryan had always been trusting, almost naively so. That's what made him the perfect husband to deceive. He believed my stories about girls' nights out, weekend conferences, and late meetings without question. Just leaving now, I texted back, adding a smiling emoji for good measure. Got distracted by a phone call from Mom. I grabbed the folder and hurried to my car, my mind formulating damage control strategies. I needed to warn Tom, but calling him now would be too risky. Ryan might be tracking my phone. That's how Jessica's husband had caught her last year. The thought made me check my car for tracking devices, but I found nothing. The drive to Ryan's office gave me time to compose myself. I talked my way out of this like I had before. Men were easy to manipulate when you knew which buttons to push. A few tears, some carefully worded half-truths, and a promise to work on our marriage. It had worked with my first husband, after all. Walking into the lobby of Ryan's law firm, I noticed something odd. The receptionist, usually warm and friendly, avoided eye contact. As I waited for the elevator, I overheard 2 paralegals whisper and glance in my direction. My chest tightened. Something was definitely wrong. Ryan's office door was closed, but I could see him through the glass walls, sitting at his desk with an unnaturally straight posture. Next to him stood a man I recognized with horror, James Wilson, the private investigator who'd handled our firm's background checks last year. The same PI who had joked during a company lunch about how he specialized in catching cheating spouses. As I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. Mrs. Thompson, I have some very interesting videos to discuss with you. Shall we begin? My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The unknown number had to be James Wilson, but how long had he been watching me? The weight of every secret rendezvous, every carefully crafted lie, and every stolen moment pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. Standing outside Ryan's office, I watched through the glass as he exchanged words with Wilson, their expressions unreadable. Just then, Tom's face appeared on my phone. The worst possible timing. I declined the call, but seconds later, a text appeared. Sarah, we need to talk now. Your husband's lawyer just called my wife. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Ryan hadn't just hired a PI. He'd been methodically gathering evidence, building a case. All those times I thought I was playing him, he'd been 10 steps ahead. The realization made me physically ill. I'd underestimated him catastrophically. I forced myself to enter his office, plastering on the confident smile that had gotten me through countless sticky situations. Hey, honey. Sorry about the delay. Traffic was terrible? Yes, you mentioned that. Ryan's voice was eerily calm as he gestured to a chair. Though according to the GPS tracker on your car, you spent 47 minutes at the Holiday Inn. Room 412. I believe. The private investigator cleared his throat. Mrs. Thompson, we have video footage from the hotel, phone records dating back 18 months, and testimony from... He paused, consulting his notebook, David Martinez and Mark Stevens. Both were quite cooperative when presented with evidence of their own indiscretions. My mind raced. David and Mark had talked, but I'd been so careful to choose married men with as much to lose as I had. Then it hit me, Ryan must have leveraged his law firm's resources, perhaps threatening to expose them to their own wives if they didn't cooperate. Ryan, please, I started, reaching for his hand across the desk. Whatever you think happened. He withdrew his hand as if my touch burned. What I think. He pressed a button on his phone, and my own voice filled the room. He's so clueless, Tom. Ryan actually believes I'm working late every Thursday. Men are so easy to manipulate when they trust you. The recording continued, revealing intimate details of my betrayal, my mockery of Ryan's trust, my calculated deceptions. Each word felt like a knife twisting in my gut, not from guilt, but from the dawning horror that my perfectly constructed world was crumbling. I've filed for divorce, Ryan stated matter-of-factly, sliding a thick envelope across the desk. My terms are non-negotiable. You might want to read through these documents carefully before deciding how to proceed, especially page 17. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Page 17 contained photos, dozens of them. Not just of Tom, but of every affair I'd had over the past 5 years. Times, dates, locations, all meticulously documented. But worse than the photos were the bank statements. Every penny I'd secretly siphoned from our joint accounts, every fraudulent expense report I'd filed at work, every financial deception I'd committed, all laid bare in stark black and white. The office seemed to close in around me as I stared at the evidence of my destruction. Each photograph, each bank statement, each transcribed conversation was another nail in the coffin of the life I'd built. My throat constricted as I realized Ryan hadn't just discovered my affairs. He'd uncovered every single lie I told over the past 5 years. There's more, Ryan said, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. While investigating your extracurricular activities, Mr. Wilson discovered something interesting about your position at Thompson and Associates. My blood ran cold. He couldn't know about that. I'd been too careful. Your promotion to senior marketing director last year, he continued, sliding another document across the desk. Fascinating how you got that position right after your private meeting with CEO Michael Thompson. The same Michael Thompson who, coincidentally, started transferring large sums into an offshore account shortly after. The room spun. I'd thought that particular secret would never surface. The blackmail, the threats, the compromising photos I'd used to secure my position. It had been my masterpiece of manipulation. I've already spoken with the board of directors, Ryan said, answering my unspoken question. They're very interested in the evidence I've gathered. In fact, they're meeting right now to discuss it. My phone buzzed again, an email from HR. My hands shook as I read the subject line, "Immediate termination of employment." "You didn't?" I whispered, looking up at Ryan with genuine fear for the first time. "Oh, but I did. Just like I sent copies of your creative accounting to the IRS. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. "You see, Sarah, while you were busy juggling lovers and constructing lies, I was learning everything about you. Every secret account, every manipulated document, every person you've blackmailed or threatened. It's amazing what people will tell you when they realize they're not your only victim." James Wilson cleared his throat again. "Mrs. Thompson, we should also discuss the irregularities we found in your previous divorce settlement. It seems the evidence you presented against your first husband was fabricated. The walls of my carefully constructed life weren't just crumbling. They were being systematically demolished by the man I'd foolishly underestimated." Ryan hadn't just gathered evidence of my affairs. He'd orchestrated a complete dismantling of every scheme, every con, every manipulation I'd ever pulled. "The divorce terms are simple," Ryan continued, his voice professionally detached. "You sign over everything, the house, the cars, your claim to my assets and pension. In return, I don't send this evidence to the state prosecutor." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. "I believe fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion carry quite severe penalties these days." I sat there, staring at the mountain of evidence that documented every calculated decision, every manipulative move I'd made over the years. The magnitude of Ryan's revenge was becoming clear. He hadn't just caught me cheating. He'd systematically dismantled every aspect of my carefully constructed life. "There's one more thing," Ryan said, pressing a button on his desk phone. His secretary's voice crackled through the speaker. "Your mother is online too." My mother? The same woman who'd cut ties with me 3 years ago after I'd convinced her to invest her retirement savings in a business venture that never existed? Sarah. My mother's voice filled the room, heavy with emotion. "Ryan found me 6 months ago. He showed me everything, the fraudulent investment documents, the forged signatures, the way you used my savings to pay off your gambling debts." The last thread of my composure snapped. My own mother had been part of Ryan's plan? I thought I'd buried those documents so deep they'd never surface. "Mom, I started, but she cut me off. I've signed a formal statement for the prosecutors," she continued, her voice stronger now. "Ryan helped me understand that enabling your behavior isn't love. It's compliance in your destruction of others' lives." After my mother hung up, Ryan slid one final document across the desk. "Your sister Jessica sends her regards. Remember the inheritance you helped her steal from your father's estate? The one you convinced her to split with you by doctoring his will. She's agreed to testify as well." The room tilted dangerously as the full scope of Ryan's revenge became clear. He hadn't just exposed my affairs or financial crimes. He'd systematically contacted every person I'd ever manipulated, every victim of my schemes, every witness to my deceptions. He'd spent months, maybe years, building not just a divorce case, but a comprehensive record of my entire life of fraud and manipulation. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Tom. "It's over, Sarah. Your husband's lawyer showed my wife everything. She's filing for divorce, and I'm cooperating with the investigation. I'm sorry, but I have to think about my kids." I looked up at Ryan, really seeing him for the first time. Gone was the trusting, naive husband I thought I'd been fooling all these years. In his place sat a man who had orchestrated the most thorough, devastating takedown I could imagine. "You have 24 hours to sign the divorce papers," he said, standing up. "After that, this all goes to the DA's office. Oh, and Sarah." He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "The Holiday Inn called you, left your favorite lipstick in room 412. I took the liberty of having it sent to your mother's address. You might want to stay with her for a while, since your access to our accounts has been frozen. The door closed behind him with a quiet click, leaving me alone with James Wilson and the wreckage of every lie I'd ever told. In the end, my greatest deception had been convincing myself that I was smarter than everyone else, especially the husband who had spent years planning the perfect revenge. Thank you for listening the story to the end. Write your thoughts about it in the comments and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next videos.